There's liability and there's consequences. And those gravities, they don't care about your feelings. Why are you picking people to build your life that's all they care about is your feelings, and they're letting you deal with the consequences? You need a qualified builder. These are time-tested results that can be proven. You were created for a divine purpose. You were created to have life. Anybody that's willing to talk the blueprints to our lives and let them just start reconstructing everything. And yet we're listening. We're building something infinitely more important than a house. We're building our lives. Imagine walking down to your local county office where you buy permits and you say, "I'd like to buy a permit to build a house." And the clerk asks you, "Well, who's your builder?" And then you lean in real close and you say, "Well, there's this 19-year-old TikToker that had some really cool ideas. And then there's this Instagram influencer that showed her dream house. Plus also there's this celebrity that said I should follow my heart. So I'm letting them design my house." The clerk would look at you like you're insane. They might ask, "Do they have a contractor's license? How about an engineering degree? Any contracting experience at all?" You'd be laughed out of the office. You couldn't even build a deck without a professional. Yet the insane part is we're building something infinitely more important than a house. We're building our lives, and we're handing the blueprint to people who wouldn't even be qualified to build a shed in your back lawn. A 2023 study showed that 74% of young adults get their primary life advice from social media influencers, not mentors, not experts, not people that actually built lasting relationships, careers, or even meaning in life, but from people whose main credentials and qualifications are they're photogenic, they look good on camera, and they're good at conversation. We're trusting the most important construction project that we'll ever undertake to the least qualified people to build in human history, and then we wonder why everything's falling apart. Last episode, we talked about a building principle called the permafrost line. The permafrost line is where ground doesn't move. So when you build on solid ground and everything above it doesn't shift. So the next is, after you actually find solid ground, is you need a qualified builder. And this is the thing where our generation has absolutely lost their mind, is the people they're letting build their lives, their structures. So let me tell you something about real builders. These are the guys that actually build things that don't fall down. They have a beautiful humility, and that humility is they know their limitations. I have a friend who has been building for over 30 years. And this is the type of guy that he can look at a set of blueprints and see the whole house constructed in his mind. And he can begin to explain it to you and absolutely mesmerize you at how well he knows the insides and outs of that construction. But even that guy knows his limitations. He knows that he's a builder, not an electrician. So when it comes time to put in the electrical, he calls in an electrician. When it comes time to do the plumbing, he calls in a plumber. When it comes time for foundational work or structural questions, he brings in a structural engineer. Why? Because this guy knows that confidence without competence equals catastrophe. So then, one wrong move, one wrong decision, and people get seriously hurt. There's liability and there's consequences. And those consequences have a gravity of mistakes. And those gravities, they don't care about your feelings. So then the question is, why are you picking people to build your life that's all they care about is your feelings, and they're letting you deal with the consequences? So here's how the real building world works. An architect, he needs to have 5 to 7 years of schooling, then move into an apprenticeship. An engineer needs to have advanced degrees, and then a master builder, He'll work decades just for that title. And then a general contractor, well, he has to be licensed, insured, bonded. But yet when it comes to who's building our lives, we just let any old person, we let a 22-year-old TikToker give us our life advice, and they've just started adulting about 4 years ago. And they're lucky if they've made a transition to one job. They've never been married. They've never built a marriage, but yet they're turning around and giving us life advice. And here's the crazy thing, that we're listening. I don't think the crazy thing is that they're doing it. The craziest part is we're listening to them. We're listening to actors that want to be philosophers, and they spend all their life pretending to be somebody else or pretending to be a real person. And yet their personal life is a train wreck. They've been through 5 bad marriages, but yet they're teaching us how to be committed. And they're saying something on, let's say, a talk show or something that made us feel good. So then we're handing them the blueprints and letting them completely renovate our worldview. And somebody that is a influencer, we're letting them change the way we think, and they're building a following. Well, that's what they're interested in. And they're changing and giving advice based on an algorithm. And yet we're listening. Look, here's the crazy thing. I know a builder. This man had built for 40 years, and he was in commercial building. He was applying for a job for a huge commercial project in a city near us in Denver. And he had showed me his resume, and I was thoroughly impressed with what he had done. And the people that were doing the interview process, they were going back and forth through email, and they liked his resume, but yet then they wanted to know what projects has he built. And then when he listed out the projects, how he had built hospitals, senior living facilities that actually had hospital nurse stations within them. He had built colleges, some high-rise apartments, and all of that. And he actually had to give them the names where they could look up the projects and when they were built and the extent of the project and how it came in on budget. And his portfolio was awesome. But the crazy thing is, they came back and sent him an email thanking him for applying for the job, but said they went with other candidates. And that's how particular they are when it comes to building something like building a commercial project. But we don't give it 2 thoughts, but yet we're willing to give anybody that's willing to talk the blueprints to our lives and let them just start reconstructing everything. And yet we're living with the end results. Something ought to tell us that we probably ought to step back a little bit. So this is what I've learned in 30 years of ministry, watching amateurs build other people's lives. You'll take a 25-year-old young man who has received his influence from YouTube, and he's a nihilist, and with social anxiety and depression, he has no purpose in life. He doesn't believe life has meaning, and he himself is going nowhere, and he hasn't built anything that'll last. And then you'll have a young lady who received her advice off of somebody that monetizes drama, and now she has 3 failed relationships, and she doesn't even trust her own judgment. And the truth is, the advice she was getting wasn't from wise master builders. It was from people that specialize in demolition, and now that's what her life looks like. Or you have people that take parenting or family advice from trends or trendy experts who have no kids of their own, and now their kids are grown and they have no boundaries. They're going nowhere in life, and their children don't come back home. They've been told how to handle their marriage, and now their marriage is so topsy-turvy, there's no solid ground, and they're wondering what it's all about. But the question is, maybe they should have taken advice from somebody that had literal fruit and fruit to show for their works. Not just somebody that had a life that worked, but somebody that their children's lives worked as well. Not just a marriage that's there, but a marriage that actually thrived. Not just somebody that is successful, but somebody that teaches other people around them how to be successful. These are time-tested results that can be proven. And things that are principles that are timeless, they don't come and go with every passing whim. They're actually principles that last. You could apply these type of principles in every generation or any generation in any culture, and they work. They just work, because the crazy thing is humans were not that complex. We're just told we're complex. A man today is no different than a man was 6,000 years ago, or a woman 2,000 years ago. Yes, she has the same chemical makeup and same desires that women have today. They're not that hard. And if you apply these principles, they're ancient. They don't change. Children are pretty simple, pretty easy to raise. They're not that hard. They need to be given boundaries, love, and direction. And a father needs to provide leadership and stability, along with guidance and protection. And a mother needs to provide the nurturing and the love that a child needs to let him know that no matter how many times he makes a mistake, he's still loved. And the father shows him how not to fall down. These type of stuff, they don't move. They're built kind of solid. So my question is, do you know who you're getting your advice from? And do these people, do they have a humility that they know what lane they're in? If they're a financial expert, they're not trying to be a marriage coach. If they are a relationship coach, they're not trying to be a political expert. They don't have an opinion on everything. They know what they're good at. They have results to show what they're good at. And in doing so, they're just downright, amazing. I knew a man in my congregation. He's 52 years old, going in for open heart surgery. And he had been talking to me about it up to the point, that the doctors recommended it. And to be real, he was scared. And I get it, thinking about his children and his wife. If something went wrong, where would everything be? He feels like he's just a young man. But he said something that was, I'd say, kind of neat. He said, I talked to the doctor, and the doctor's, in his 60s. He said, the doctor said to me, I can see you're a little hesitant about it. And I understand, this is a big procedure. You're going in for open heart surgery. But let me give you some confidence that I've done thousands of these procedures, of this very procedure. I know what I'm doing, and I'm good at it. When I thought about that, I'm like, yeah, that's who you want to be your doctor. You don't want a doctor he's young, he doesn't know what he's doing, but you think, oh, well, but he seems to be cool. I don't really care if he's cool, likable. I just want him to be good at his job. Well, lots of times we take advice from people just because they're charismatic or they're a close friend. The question is, what kind of results do you want? Just because they're friendly doesn't mean they get results. Just because they tell you what you want to hear doesn't mean it's the right thing. Sometimes, and I found this to be true most of the time, what is the right advice is usually the advice you don't want to hear. Because if you had already known the advice and it's something that you want to hear, you probably already came across it once or twice. If you had known what to do, you wouldn't be stuck. But the fact that you're stuck is you don't know what the answers are. And if you don't know what the answers are, thing is, you need somebody to tell you, and you need somebody to be honest. And you don't want them there just to, you're another algorithm, or you're another click on the social media. You don't want a doctor that he's there just to write you another prescription and be on the way. You want him to dig down. What is the problem? And what's causing the problem? Don't patch up the symptom. Fix the problem. Well, remember, you're building lives here, and you have a life that's worth millions of dollars. I would advise you just to stop for a moment and ask yourself some questions. Is there portions of my life that I let anybody that wanted to come along and work on my house? Could you imagine that? Anybody that came along, and if they wanted to build, no credentials, you were willing to pay them, and they built it in which way they want, and you stood back. Or people that came along and watched you implement that advice, stood back and scratched their head and then looked at it and wondered, I don't even know what it is. I don't even know what they built. Well, how many people, their relationships look like that? You stand back and you scratch your head and you don't even know what they built. You don't even know where they're going. You don't even know what they're trying to accomplish with all of this. I mean, it seems like if you were trying to accomplish anything, it was self-destruction at times. The thing is, you wonder that do people actually sit down and think about this and then carry the thought all the way out? My question is, did you even want a good relationship? Did you want to bounce from marriage to marriage to marriage? Is that what I mean, if that was the objective, it looks like you implemented all the right stuff. But if you were wanting peace and harmony, I wouldn't have done that, you know? So my thing is when you're looking to actually get advice from somebody and let them build on your lives and you're going to implement this, remember, you're going to pay the bill. It's going to come due. So I would be careful how I build and I wouldn't build on trends. And if it's my life and I'm going to be the one that eat the fruit off of this tree, then I would be very sagacious of what I planted. I wouldn't care what anybody thought. I wouldn't care what anybody said because at the end of the day, you'll have a million critics, but they're not coming and paying the bill. You are. And if you're paying the bill, then you ought to be the one to have the say in it all. So this week, I'd like for you to do an uncomfortable audit and start writing down a list. And in that list, write out who are you listening to? Honestly, who's shaping your philosophy? Who are you letting shape your career? And who is influencing your self-worth? These are just some small questions. See, let me explain something to you. If I was going to interview somebody for any project or job that they were going to do, and if the job was meaningful or important, then I would definitely be very critical and judgmental about that person and their skills and qualifications. And my thing is, because like this, if you ask the question, who's teaching me about meaning and purpose in life? Well, stop for a moment. If somebody, all they're teaching you is about meaning and purpose is you're here for no reason. You came from nowhere. When you die, you're going nowhere. And all of it is meaningless, pointless, and you have no purpose. Now go build a life off of that. That's literally insane. But on the other hand, if somebody said, hey, you were created for a divine purpose and you were created by a designer and you were created to flourish in this life. You were created to thrive. You are not by accident and you're not by chance. God said to Jeremiah, before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you and foreordained you a prophet to the nations. And stop and think about that. If somebody, on the other hand, told you that you were in the mind of God, just like every child is in the loins of his father before he ever comes forward, and he needed the bedding ground of your mother for the two to come together to make you. And then he says, but yet that's your fleshly body. But yet beyond that, you are in the mind of God, your heavenly Father, who foreordained you and knew you before the worlds were created. And he waited for the fullness of time when everything got right and where he wanted you. And he allowed the natural circumstances to come to pass to bring you about. And you are divinely loved. You were created for a divine purpose. You were created to have life and life abundantly. The Gospel, St. John, in the New Testament, John, the 10th chapter and the 10th verse, says that God created us that we would have life and life abundantly. God told them in the beginning to multiply and have dominion over the earth and be very fruitful over the earth and to live and to flourish. This is yours, a habitation. And St. Paul said that I pray that your whole soul, body, and spirit would be counted blameless at the Lord's coming. So then when you think that on one hand you have a large sect of society and voices that are screaming, that are telling you that life is pointless and life is meaningless and you have no meaning and your life is pointless, then do they actually want to live the life they're selling? Would you want to live the life they're selling? And then at the end of the day, what has it created? Look at the generation that it's created. They're on more medication than they've ever been on. They're on more substance than they've ever been on. And it's more of the nihilistic talk that you have no purpose in this world. But on the other hand, there's a faint whisper in the wind that says, keep going. You were created for a divine Heavenly Father, and He's standing at the end of your tomorrows, bidding you come. And then all of your trials, they make you stronger, they make you better. You create and you bring meaning out of suffering at times, and you're stronger and you're the better for it. And then God promised, because you're a free moral agent, that you will go through sufferings in this world. But He said, if you're His and if you're called, then all things work for the good to them that are called according to His purpose. Well, man, you can't lose with that thought. And the thing is, you just have to be a little bit more discriminatory about little bit more, scrutinize a little bit more of the people that you're listening to, and try to have a little more discernment, that be a little more critical about the voices. Just because you like them, just because they're your friends, they might be your best friend. You don't even have to tell them. But right here, yeah, I don't want what you're selling. Because are you qualified to build a life? Just because it's a high school math teacher doesn't mean he or she is qualified to give life advice. They're not a guidance counselor. Just because they happen to be in your life doesn't mean they're qualified to build your life. Do you know, in the ancient times, people knew this. This was something that was common knowledge. In the Jewish tradition, a man had to be at least 30 years old before he could give life advice. Why? Because he had to have went through a few cycles of life and recovered from failure. In the Greek culture, the Greek philosopher, he had to demonstrate his practical wisdom, not just clever words. In the Roman Stoics, they were judged by how they faced adversity, not the rhetoric. So you ought to actually turn back around and take a little bit of care of how you build your life. Because the funny thing is, we're the first generation that are building lives on advice from people that have never faced life yet. And that's kind of crazy. So my thought in closing, you wouldn't let an amateur build your house. So why would you let them put together your relationships? Why would you let them tell you how to parent your kids? Why would you let them tell you how to navigate a marriage? So you wouldn't let anybody operate on you with surgical tools that's never had a scalpel in their hand. Why would you let somebody build your life just because, or give you your political views or your political influences just because they are famous, because they happen to be an actor, or they happen to be a great football player or athlete? Well, that means they're qualified to be a good athlete. But just because they're a tennis player doesn't mean they're a basketball player. We keep those lanes separate. And just because they know how to play football doesn't mean they're qualified to give you your political opinions, relationship advice, or anything else. I'd want to see your portfolio before I listen to anything somebody had to say. So until next time, you keep working on your life and I'll keep working on mine, and we'll see how we do at the end.